Star Wars 7x7, episode 1992 today, the second half of my conversation with Christian Blauvert, who is the author of, among other books, How Not to Get Eaten by Ewoks and Other Galactic Survival Skills. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So, the How Not to Get Eaten by Ewoks book, we haven't talked about that on the podcast, and it's a very fun book. So, you know those worst case survival books that have been around for a number of years? They're written in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way, even though they talk about ludicrous situations in some cases. Well, that certainly lends itself to a Star Wars version of that kind of book. And the tongue-in-cheek kind of humor, also fits very well with a Star Wars style book. And Christian Blauvert does a fantastic job with it. This is a really difficult kind of book to write when you actually look at it. Just the way that the layouts are presented and having to, fill everything in, the amount of detail is just insane and astounding. And yet, Christian seems to be the perfect person to have been chosen to do a book like this. And during this conversation, I'm going to be asking Christian about the process of creating a book like this, as well as the process for bringing in expanded universe references and making them canon again, and about what happens for bringing in references to things that might be in Star Wars stories that have yet to be released, among other things too. So that's coming up right after the break. But before we get there, I do want to say thank you so much for joining me and again, Christian, for this episode, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be. But now, hang on, right after the break, the other part of my conversation with Christian Blauvert, the author of How Not to Get Eaten by Ewoks and Other Galactic Survival Skills. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7x7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7x7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7x7. All right, so let's switch gears and let's talk about how not to be eaten by Ewoks. I have a very important question for you in this regard. So the book is written as an in-universe book, correct?
Yes, exactly.
So does that mean that the author, Christian Blauvert, we'll put that in quotes because the book says it's written by Christian Blauvert. Does that mean that Christian Blauvert is now an official Star Wars canon character?
Yes, I believe so. That is what I choose to believe anyway. Now you'd have to, ask Matt Martin or Pablo or one of the story group folks if that's absolutely true. You could also say, I suppose, that in writing this book, I am adopting the character, or I'm almost like acting the part of an author in the galaxy far, far away who has written this book. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that author has a different name than Christian Blauvert. Christian Blauvert almost sounds like a name that could be in the Star Wars galaxy.
Well,
It could arguably be someone with an author with a different name. But either way, I mean, when I was writing it, I was, basically playing the part of what an author in the galaxy far, far away would think, and the point of view that they would have, and the perspective that they would bring to all of this. And so that meant that, it's different from a perspective than you usually get on Star Wars. It's not necessarily just saying you should join up with or support the rebels. I see it as being set like right before the Battle of Endor, that book. So it's not necessarily saying that you should join up with the rebels. It's not necessarily, advocating for the Empire either. It's basically saying you should just look out for yourself, stay clear of this whole fight, do your own thing. So it's kind of the perspective of DJ from The Last Jedi, or Aphra, or, just like, at an earlier time, Han Solo in a way, just like, I stick my neck out for nobody. This is the way I'm just going to make my way through the galaxy unharmed and maybe making a little profit along the way.
Right. It's not like a hero's guide. It's an every person's guide, basically.
Exactly. And I guess that's ultimately where it does really differ from the Han Solo perspective, because I say right up front that this is a book that tells you the odds.
Right. So from your background, and particularly magazine writing, where you have to write to fit, is a book like this easy in the sense that you've done it for long enough where it's the old George Bernard Shaw thing about, I write when inspiration strikes and I expect it to strike at 9 a.m. sharp. Like, do you just sit down and I know what I need to do. I've got the layout, I've got space, and just bang, this is what I have to do.
That's basically it. You can't wait for inspiration to strike. You have to make your own inspiration when you're a writer. And, so for this, I was lucky in that, I just so eat and breathe everything Star Wars. And so this was also an opportunity to put some details here and there from the old expanded universe and recanonize some things. So just having been steeped in that whole thing, really was useful here. But it just it meant that all of the Star Wars reading and all of the material beyond the films that I've consumed over the past couple decades, really helped to inform what I would write about here, the tone as well. But no, you have to just really power through. This is one where they gave me the layouts, as you mentioned earlier, but it's that can be pretty daunting too, because it's all right, write 225 words about Sabacc, or about, the rules of Dejarik, or, the different pieces and the different player pieces in Dejarik. Actually, it's kind of interesting. That whole page of Galactic Games of Chance and the rules, which includes Sabacc and Dejarik, as an example of how you can't let the production of a book like this slide at all. That particular page, it's a 2-page spread, I wrote from a hospital gurney earlier this year at New York Presbyterian Hospital. I had this strange, weird, infection of my jaw that I got after a really bad head cold. And I was there for 12 hours. And, most of that time when you're in the ER is just waiting around, for hours on end. So I was in this hospital gurney, just waiting for them to change my IV bag or whatever. And I had my laptop with me. So, I wrote a number of pages in the book. I think I wrote 4 or 5 pages when all was said and done, just from the hospital bed. And including lucid? That I was lucid. Yeah. Including the Galactic Games of Chance spread. So if you see that, if you look at that, just know that was written from a hospital bed.
Yeah, that is some serious dedication, to be sure. So do you have, obviously you have what we could easily say is a comparatively encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars information, but when you don't have it, what options do you have? Are you going to Wikipedia? Do you have access to Matt and Pablo and Leland and those folks, or what's your solutions?
Well, I think Wikipedia is really great. It's generally very accurate. It's so well curated. It's pretty incredible. But the story group did. The story group always looks over all of my books, at least at the end, if not earlier. In this case, it was Leland who was really over a lot of it, and I don't think there was much to change. I think actually, even though, and I don't think it's just because I was in the hospital, but I do think that the rules of Sabacc did change a little bit there. I think they were even more complicated than I thought they were. So that would have come from Leland. But generally, I was amazed at how little was really changed in this book. I think maybe for the spread about food and drink in a galaxy far, far away, that's includes the Outlander Club, and that was a really daunting one where there were 20 arrows to just all the different drinks behind the bar. It was just name these, and so some of all the names that I gave them were all in-universe names, from here and there. The one I always mention is I named a red wine the Ruby Bleal because that was a drink that Lando says he wants in the game Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. He says that to Cal Katarn, and Cal Katarn is like, yeah, I could go for one of those. and so I was like, well, that has to, be one of the drinks here. Mm-hmm. And so they left that in. It's great. And I think maybe they added a few drinks into that are featured like at Oga's Cantina at Galaxy's Edge. But, all the rest, so there are a few Galaxy's Edge drinks in there, but all the rest, come from the EU or elsewhere.
So you mentioned two things, actually, that I wanted to ask you about. One of them being the expanded universe. Do you get parameters for what you can canonize, what you cannot canonize? Did they say things like, for example, a type of alcohol is fine, but don't mention the conflict, don't mention the Battle of Tanab, for example, because
right.
Are there parameters that you have to stay within?
That's really interesting. No, at least up front, I'm never given any of those parameters. I think that's just a judgment call that's made in the editing process afterward. And that's great. And I think that's from, I can't speak for other authors, but I think that's generally how it's been for other authors as well, other Star Wars authors as well, even for novels and, other fiction works, that it's about, put in what you want to put in, tell the story that you want to tell, and they'll assess it later. And maybe there's something they'll say no to, maybe there isn't. Maybe they'll allow it. And I think in that regard, Lucasfilm has to be given a lot of credit for really letting the creators they bring in a lot of freedom to tell the stories that they want to do and to include the details that they want to include. I think they say yes a lot more than they say no.
That's awesome to hear. That's very cool. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, so Pablo Hidalgo did a panel discussion a while back, and he talked about the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide from DK. And that had the first mention of crate in it. And he talked about how we're sneaking things into these things that you're not paying attention to. And so what I wanted to ask you was, do you ever get direction, or with this, do you get direction to include things that are for stories that haven't yet been released to the general public?
If I have, honestly, I don't even necessarily know if I have. It's one of those things, maybe, but maybe not. And I think that's another way in which they work with authors, that they may give certain directions here and there to include certain things, but the author doesn't necessarily know, what the relevance of that is going forward.
Okay.
No, I can't think of, a specific example. In my book, Star Wars Made Easy, that was the first place where there was any mention of the Fathiers, mm-hmm. and also of the Guerrilla Walkers, the ATM-6.
Right.
That was a place where a couple of things were being introduced for the first time. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I feel like that generally, even with the authors who write the novelizations, they write it a lot of times without, almost always without having actually seen the film. They're working from a screenplay that's just under lock and key somewhere.
Right.
It's interesting how much you can do without actually knowing that much.
Christian, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate it. And have a wonderful rest of your holiday season. And I hope you love the heck out of the Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, I hope so too. Thank you so much, Alan. May the Force be with you.
And also with you.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.